Federal Reserve raises U.S. interest rates and local banks follow. Retail sales surge 40%, the largest jump in decades. Consumer Council report highlights problems in property management. Hello and welcome to TVB News. The U.S. Federal Reserve has raised interest rates by 1/4 of a percentage point to the 5 to 5.25% range. Locally, HSBC and several other banks raised best lending rates by 1/8%. The Fed signaled it may pause further rate rises, but the signs of stress at another U.S. regional bank saw the market price in a pivot rather than a pause in rates. Matthew Bray reports.
The decision to raise rates was widely expected, but investors largely brushed aside the Federal Reserve's commentary against interest rate cuts and looked ahead to an eventual pivot to policy easing.
A decision on a pause was not made today. You will have noticed that in the statement from March, we had a sentence that said the committee anticipates that some additional policy firming may be appropriate. That sentence is not in the statement anymore. We took that out, and instead we're saying that in determining the extent to which additional policy firming may be appropriate to return inflation to 2% over time, the committee will take into account certain factors. So that's a meaningful change.
The Fed has raised rates 10 times now, which has made borrowing for consumers and business steadily more expensive. Powell pushed back on market expectations that the Fed will be forced into cutting rates by year end, indicating they won't back down on fighting inflation, even as the economy begins to buckle under tighter credit conditions. The Fed will remain data dependent, Powell said. He was asked about the U.S. banking crisis that has seen 3 go under and another PacWest Bancorp now seemingly destined for the same fate.
I think it's probably good policy that we don't want the largest banks doing big acquisitions. That is the policy, and but this is an exception for a failing bank, and I think it's actually a good outcome for the banking system. It also would have been a good outcome for the banking system had one of the regional banks bought this company, and that could have been the outcome. But ultimately, we have to follow the law in our agencies, and the law is it goes to the least cost bid.
Oil retraced after sinking yesterday on concerns over weakening economic growth. The bond market waved off the prospect that Powell might have another rate rise up his sleeve, and most market participants envisage a contraction, if not a recession. Asian markets were mostly higher Thursday after the rate decision. Matthew Bray, TVB News.
Following the Fed's move, Hong Kong banks have also increased interest rates, meaning homeowners will have to pay more for mortgages. Economists believe the rate hike cycle is coming to an end. Sharon Tang has more.
HSBC and Bank of China Hong Kong announced they are raising best lending rates by 1/8% to 5.75%, while Standard Chartered adjusted its best lending rate upwards to 6%. Over the past year, the city's banks have raised interest rates several times. Though at a slower pace than the U.S. rate hikes, local homeowners need to pay more for mortgages. Taking a $5 million flat mortgage with a 30-year repayment period, for example, at the end of 2021, when the rate hike cycle began, the mortgage interest rate was at 1.37% and the monthly payment was at $16,946. Today, the mortgage interest rate has been raised to 2.9%, with the monthly payment jumping to $20,812. That's an almost $3,900 difference before and after the rate hikes.
Over the last few months, Hong Kong dollar interbank rates have been rising gradually. As the U.S. raised rates again this time, this trend is expected to continue. On the commercial interest rates of banks will decide on the timing and magnitude of adjusting them. The public should be prepared for the movement of banks' lending rates.
Economist Terence Chong believes the U.S. rate hike cycle is peaking, adding local banks may not have to continue raising interest rates. In the latest budget, Financial Secretary Paul Chan estimated the city's economy will grow 3.7% this year. Chong believes the movement in interest rates will unlikely affect Hong Kong's economy as it is mainly related to exports and financial services. Sharon Tang, TVB News.
The city's retail sales in March soared by 41% year-on-year, marking the greatest jump in 35 years. The total retail sales in March this year was provisionally estimated at $33.6 billion. That's a 41% increase compared with the same month in 2022. The government said the surge was due to improvement in consumer and visitor spending. Sales of medicines and cosmetics rose more than 60%. Sales of jewelry, valuable gifts, and optical items also jumped drastically. Officials said the recovery of inbound tourism and private consumption should continue to benefit the retail sector in the long run. A report by the Consumer Council found property management companies have overwhelming powers over individual property owners on matters including fees and whether the management company can be changed. With property owners facing such disadvantages, the council offered a number of recommendations. Timothy Lee reports.
Having one's own property is the dream of many Hong Kongers, but residents should be aware of problems after owning a flat. In a study by the Consumer Council on property management fees conducted between the end of 2020 and mid-2021, which involved more than 1,100 private property owners, it found that the monthly management fee ranged from $200 to $3,700 and averaged at $1,108. That accounted for 7.4% of the interviewees' monthly household income on average. The council received nearly 700 complaints concerning property management services over the past 11 years, with over half related to fee disputes. Currently, property management fees are determined by the deed of mutual covenant and those with a higher percentage of property shares. The current law stipulates that the DMC could only be amended under unanimous consent from all parties bound to the document, which includes the property developer. The council noted that many property developers held over half of all undivided shares, which made passing resolutions much more difficult for property owners. They also have control over the establishment of owners' corporations and termination of property management companies. The unequal relationship between owners and developers is also reflected by the fact that the council found 75% of DMC managers in the reviewed developments were affiliated with property developers. The Consumer Council said individual property owners should increase their engagement in building management affairs.
For the owners incorporation, it is a very important first step because with the owners corporation, it actually gathered all the individual owners as a group, as a pressure group to negotiate, to talk about terms on the management fee, everything to do with the building management.
In a bid to optimize the property management fees value in the city, the Consumer Council made several recommendations. They include improving the transparency of how the management fee is shared between owners and boosting property management efficiency via new technology. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
Today marks the 104th anniversary of the May 4th movement. To commemorate the occasion, senior Beijing and Hong Kong officials attended the flag-raising ceremony at the Golden Bauhinia Square in Wan Chai. It's the first time for the Committee of Youth Activities to organize the ceremony after a 3-year hiatus. It also marked a first for all 19 uniformed youth groups to march in Chinese-style formations. Chief Secretary for Administration Eric Chan and Chen Dong, Deputy Chief of Beijing's Liaison Office in Hong Kong, officiated at the ceremony. In the May 4th movement in 1919, university students in Beijing gathered to protest against the Treaty of Versailles, which allowed Japan to retain Chinese territories that had been surrendered by Germany in 1914. The 5-day May Day Golden Week holiday came to an end yesterday. More than 620,000 mainland tourists came to Hong Kong. Among them, 14,000 holidaymakers visited the SAR through budget tour groups. So far, the city's travel regulators received no complaints related to these groups. Jackie Lin with more.
Over the 5-day Golden Week holiday, more than 450 mainland tour groups registered their trip to Hong Kong, involving nearly 14,000 tourists. More than 40% of them were shopping trips. The Travel Industry Authority described the situation as having proceeded smoothly, with no complaints received related to these trips. And that's likely thanks to pre-holiday coordination efforts. Still, the travel industry watchdog says it is not ruling out more regulations towards budget tour groups crowding certain restaurants and districts. As Executive Director Annie Fonda said, should disruptions from these groups resurface in future, the Travel Industry Authority might have to put a cap on the number of tourists or tours these eateries cater to. There are also reports that some tour guides provided inaccurate information about Hong Kong's tourist attractions to mainland vacationers. She said while these cases don't constitute violations of travel industry directives, the watchdog will follow up on these reports as they could be unprofessional and mar the city's reputation. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
Coming up, mystery as to what happened as drones were shot down over Moscow. 2 potential medical breakthroughs in the U.S. Poly University inventions win major international prizes in Geneva. Welcome back. Russia said it foiled an attack by Ukrainian drones on the Kremlin early Wednesday. Moscow called it an unsuccessful assassination attempt against President Vladimir Putin, promising retaliation for what it termed a terrorist attack. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has denied attacking Putin or Moscow. Tracy Furness reports.
2:30 Wednesday morning at the Kremlin, then this. Russia says 2 drones were shot down above the building where Putin's office is located. Fragments from the drones scattered. No casualties were reported. The Kremlin believes the drone assault was a planned terrorist attack targeting Putin before the May 9th victory parade, said spokesman Dmitry Peskov. The president was safe and continued to work as usual later in the day, according to Kremlin sources. Speaking at a news conference in Finland Wednesday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky rejected Moscow's claim that Kiev attempted to attack the Kremlin.
We don't attack Putin or Moscow. We fight on our territory. We are defending our villages and cities. We don't have, enough weapons for this. That's why we don't use it anywhere. For us, that is the deficit. We can't spend it. And we didn't attack Putin. We leave it to tribunal.
Ukrainian presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolyak said the claims could provide a pretext for Russia to justify massive strikes on Ukrainian cities, on the civilian population, on infrastructure facilities. The White House said it could not confirm the authenticity of the drone attack.
Since the beginning of this conflict, the United States is certainly not encouraging, enabling Ukraine to strike beyond its borders. We've been very clear from here about that. But again, I don't want to get into speculation from here about the authenticity of this report.
Russian expert Dmitry Oreshkin, a professor at Free University in Latvia's capital Riga, said maybe it was done by some forces in the Kremlin who didn't inform others about it. It is possible. If this really was a drone attack on the Kremlin, it would be the most severe penetration of Russian airspace since German teen Matthias Rust landed his single-engine plane on Red Square in 1987. Tracy Furness, TVB News.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said he is hopeful he'll reschedule a visit to China this year. Blinken canceled an earlier scheduled meeting after the U.S. shot down a high-altitude balloon it claimed to be a Chinese spy balloon. Meanwhile, U.S. climate envoy John Kerry said he has been invited to China for talks on climate change. David Garrett reports.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken speaking on Press Freedom Day. This journalist decided to ask a question that concerns the world's two largest economies.
You had a trip that was scheduled to China that you postponed because of the Chinese spy balloon. And I have to ask you, in a period where there seems to be some warming of relations between the United States, the beginning of a thaw, are you hopeful that you may be able to reschedule that trip this year?
I am, and I think it's important, as President Biden laid out in Bali when he was with President Xi at the end of last year, that we reestablish regular lines of communication at all levels and across our government. We're in a competition with China, there's no secret about that, but we have a strong interest in trying to make sure that that competition doesn't veer into conflict.
This is why Blinken's trip was cancelled 3 months ago. A white object was spotted over US airspace. Washington believe it is a spy balloon sent by China, which Beijing denies. The US military shot down the balloon. Reports last month suggested China wasn't prepared to reschedule Blinken's trip until it knew what US President Joe Biden would do with the investigation into the balloon.
If there are areas where we can actually cooperate, because it's in the interests of our people, Chinese people and people around the world, so much the better. But at the very least, we need to have a floor under this relationship. We need to have some guardrails on it. And the way to do that is through engagement.
Meanwhile, US climate envoy John Kerry, who was a former Democratic Party presidential candidate, says he's been invited to China to talk about climate change.
President Biden has authorized a meeting, but there are certain things that we need to work through before that happens. There's no issue about whether or not we should meet. We understand that we're the two largest economies in the world. We're the two largest emitters of greenhouse gases in the world.
Kerry was speaking on the sidelines of a conference on global warming in Berlin. He said the United States and China must work together to address climate change. David Garrett, TVB News.
In the U.S., an experimental drug aimed at slowing worsening Alzheimer's has shown promise. After an 18-month trial on people with early-stage symptoms who received infusions of donanemab, 35% showed less decline than those taking a dummy drug. And the U.S. has approved the first vaccine for RSV Wednesday.
The big news is that we have one manufacturer now that has produced an RSV vaccine that is targeted to older adults. So along with influenza vaccine and COVID vaccine, we'll be able to prevent serious disease that can lead to hospitalization in older adults against these three very bad respiratory viruses.
The Food and Drug Administration's decision to approve the drug paves the way for other potential vaccines in the pipeline for RSV to be licensed. Adults 60 and above could be vaccinated this autumn, but the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention must decide if every senior needs RSV protection or only those considered high risk from the virus. And back locally, the Hong Kong Polytechnic University has won 31 prizes for 28 invention projects at the International Exhibition of Inventions in Geneva. The exhibition is regarded as one of the most important annual global events devoted to inventions. Mimo Sengai reports.
This is not an ordinary camera. Its full name is Mars Landing Surveillance Camera and had an important mission in 2021. It helped China's Tianwen-1 lander to monitor the landing status and deployment of the Mars rover. To survive the harsh environment on Mars, the space-qualified camera has some special features, such as a wide temperature range. Moreover, the camera is designed to be light, weighing just 390 grams. The invention obtained a special award and a gold medal with congratulations of the jury at the 48th Geneva Inventions Expo in April. Yong Kai-learn, one of the camera's researchers and chair professor of precision engineering, said the technologies developed for the invention can also be used in other situations.
One of them includes a surgery robot. You know, the environment inside the human body is actually a very harsh environment because you have humidity and everything. So we apply the technology for the development of the harsh environment in space to put it inside the human being in order to have a much clearer picture of the surgery.
Meanwhile, these are nano multi-ring defocus incorporators, spectacle lenses. The invention won a grand award and gold medal with congratulations of the jury. Using the ultra-precision nano multi-ring machining technology, researchers hope to slow myopic progression in children. Have a closer look at the lens. It shows circular spaced correction and defocus zones. The function of the correction zones is to correct vision at the central retina, while the defocus zones inhibit eyeball elongation, reducing myopic progression. Principal researcher Benny Jones said the team had conducted clinical tests on 18 children and teenagers aged between 9 and 15, asking them to wear the glasses for 9.5 months. Jones said positive corrective effects were seen. The price for each pair is about $3,000 to $4,000. The team said they hope to manufacture the products intelligently in future to reduce costs. PolyU obtained 31 prizes at the Geneva Inventions Expo, the highest number of awards the institution won at the event. Mimosa Nai, TVB News.
That is the news. Thanks for watching. Good night.